A heavy silence hung over the dimly lit courtroom, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the judge's gavel. The scent of old wood and leather-bound law books filled the air. Rows of spectators sat motionless, their eyes locked on the center of the room. Lawyers whispered among themselves, their voices barely audible over the hushed tension. But the moment the courtroom doors creaked open, all eyes shifted to the unexpected witness. A German shepherd limped forward, his amber eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces. His fur was matted with dried mud, his movements slow yet determined. His paws clicked softly against the marble floor, leaving faint marks on the pristine surface. Whispers erupted among the spectators. "What's a dog doing in here?" one voice murmured. "Is that a police K9?" Another gasped. The judge, an elderly man with deep-set wrinkles and an air of authority, removed his glasses and leaned forward. "Bailiff, what is the meaning of this?" The bailiff, clearly caught off guard, hesitated before answering. "Your Honor, this K9 unit has been called to testify." A stunned silence followed. A dog? Testifying? The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man with slicked-back hair, smirked. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A dog cannot take the stand." But the defense attorney, a woman with fierce determination in her eyes, stood firm. "Your Honor, this dog was present the night of the crime, and I believe he knows the truth." The judge exhaled deeply, glancing at the German shepherd who sat at attention, his gaze locked on the accused, a man in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled in front of him. The man stiffened under the dog's unblinking stare. Something wasn't right. The tension in the room thickened. No one spoke. No one moved. Then the German shepherd did something that sent a cold shiver down everyone's spine. He growled, low, deep, a sound filled with recognition, with warning. And just like that, the entire trial took a turn no one could have predicted. The sharp growl of the German shepherd echoed in the courtroom, sending an uneasy ripple through the audience. The accused, a middle-aged man with sunken eyes and a nervous twitch, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Judge Harrison, a man who had presided over hundreds of cases, furrowed his brows and turned to the defense attorney. "Ms. Reynolds, I hope you have a very good explanation for this." The woman nodded, her piercing blue eyes filled with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, allow me to introduce our witness." A murmur spread across the room. All eyes turned to the German shepherd, sitting obediently beside a man in a neatly pressed uniform, his handler, Detective James Carter. A seasoned officer with a decade of service in the K9 unit, Carter had seen it all: drug busts, high-speed chases, violent criminals. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat before addressing the court. "This is Max," Carter began, placing a gentle hand on the dog's back. "He's a retired K9 officer, 5 years of active duty, 4 major cases solved, and the only living witness to what happened that night." The audience fell into stunned silence. Max's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but his eyes never left the accused man. He stared at him, unblinking, as if he knew something no one else did. The prosecutor scoffed. "Detective Carter, are you seriously telling this court that a dog can testify?" Carter met his gaze evenly. "No, sir, but he can remember. He can recognize faces, and he can indicate guilt." Judge Harrison leaned forward, intrigued but skeptical. "Detective Carter, let's take a step back. Start from the beginning." Carter inhaled deeply. His mind drifted back to that fateful night just a few weeks ago when everything changed. That night. The incident. The rain had been relentless, hammering the streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Detective Carter pulled his squad car to a stop outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Max sat in the passenger seat, his black and tan fur damp from the humidity. His ears were erect, body tense. He sensed something was off. Carter tightened his grip on the wheel. "You feel that, buddy?" Max let out a low whine, his keen eyes locked on the warehouse door. They had received an anonymous tip, something about a missing woman, a deal gone wrong. No backup, no warrant. Just Carter, Max, and the suffocating darkness ahead. Stepping out of the car, Carter unhooked Max's leash, letting him move freely. The dog trotted ahead, sniffing the air with precision. Then he froze. Carter's heartbeat quickened. "What is it, boy?" Max's hackles rose. He let out a low, guttural growl, his body rigid. Then, bang! A single gunshot shattered the silence. Carter's instincts kicked in. He ducked behind a stack of crates, gun drawn. Max bolted toward the noise, his powerful legs carrying him through the shadows. Then, a scream. A woman's scream. "Help! Please!" Carter sprinted forward, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The scene before him sent ice through his veins. A woman, bound and gagged, was slumped against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. Standing over her was a man in a dark hoodie, gripping a gun in his trembling hands, and Max, fearless, relentless, was lunging straight at him. Back in the courtroom, Detective Carter's voice grew tight as he recalled the events of that night. Max did what he was trained to do. He took down the suspect, but before I could cuff him, the man escaped into the storm. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. "And you believe the man sitting in this courtroom today is the same one from that night?" Carter nodded grimly. "I don't believe it, Your Honor. I know it. And so does Max." All eyes turned to the German Shepherd. He hadn't moved an inch. His eyes remained locked on the accused. Then, without warning, Max did something that sent shivers down everyone's spine. He let out a deep, menacing snarl. The accused flinched. His hands trembled. And for the first time since the trial began, he looked afraid. Something told Carter that Max remembered more than just a face. He remembered the truth. A tense silence gripped the courtroom. The air felt thick, suffocating as all eyes shifted between Max, the German Shepherd, and the man sitting at the defendant's table. Max's snarl was more than just a sound. It was a revelation, a crack in the carefully crafted defense. The accused, Daniel Creed, wiped the sweat from his brow, forcing a shaky smirk. "You can't seriously expect a dog's growl to be used as evidence." His voice wavered despite his attempt at confidence. "Judge." Harrison's gaze darkened. He turned to Detective Carter. "You said Max remembers faces. Are you suggesting this dog can identify the suspect?" Carter hesitated. He knew what he was implying, but the law was clear. Dogs weren't legal witnesses. No jury in the world would convict based on a canine's reaction alone. But Carter had seen this before. Dogs remember, and Max? Max didn't just remember. He never forgot. The moral dilemma gnawed at Carter. If he pushed this further, he'd be risking the credibility of the entire case. He needed solid proof, not just an animal's instincts. But, at the same time, Max had never been wrong before. Could he ignore what was right in front of him? Flashback. The aftermath of the incident. After the gunshot rang out that night, after the woman's screams had died into desperate sobs, after Max had chased the suspect into the storm, Carter had found himself standing in the middle of a crime scene with more questions than answers. The suspect had escaped. The woman, Melissa Hayes, had been rescued, but she was too shaken to identify her attacker. And Max had come back limping, his body trembling, his fur damp from the rain. But his eyes told the whole story. He had seen the man's face. Carter had crouched down, running a hand through the dog's fur. "You saw him, didn't you?" Max had nudged Carter's hand, his ears still perked, his gaze locked on the distant shadows where the suspect had vanished. Carter had clenched his jaw. Then, we're not giving up. But without an ID, without solid proof, the case had gone cold, until last week, when Daniel Creed had been arrested on an unrelated charge. When Carter had brought Max in for questioning, the dog had reacted the same way he had that night in the rain. A low growl. A warning. A memory resurfacing. Back to the present. The weight of the decision Carter shifted his gaze to Melissa Hayes, the woman they had rescued. She sat in the courtroom, her hands gripping the edge of her seat, eyes darting nervously between Max and Creed. She wanted justice. And Carter knew this was their only shot, but the defense attorney, Ms. Reynolds, wasn't going to let it slide. She stood, smoothing out her suit jacket. Your Honor, we can't seriously consider a dog's reaction as reliable testimony. There's no scientific basis for this. Carter clenched his fists. That's not true. K-9 units have identified suspects for decades. Dogs have memories. They know the difference between friend and foe. Ms. Reynolds smirked. Then let's test that theory. She turned to the judge. With the court's permission, let's introduce a few other men. If the dog reacts to only my client, then maybe, just maybe, Detective Carter has a point. The judge hesitated, then nodded. I'll allow it. Carter swallowed hard. He had put everything on the line. Max, his partner, his friend. He was the only one who could prove the truth. But what if he was wrong? What if the memory had faded? What if this was all just an officer grasping at straws, hoping for a miracle? Carter knelt beside Max, lowering his voice. This is it, buddy. This is our only chance. Max's ears flicked. His eyes stayed locked on Creed. His body remained still, but his muscles tensed, ready. And then, the bailiff opened the door, and 3 men walked in, one by one. 3 strangers, and 1 guilty man. Max's gaze swept over the first man. Nothing. Then, the second. No reaction. Then the third. Still nothing. A nervous chuckle escaped Ms. Reynolds. Well, looks like your star witness isn't so... Then Max turned back to Daniel Creed, and without hesitation, he lunged. The courtroom erupted. Creed leapt, back in his seat, his face draining of color. His hands shook as he stammered, Get that dog away from me. But Max didn't move. His body trembled with tension, every instinct in him screaming the truth. And then, as if confirming everything, Max let out a sharp, feral bark. It wasn't just a reaction. It was recognition. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. Carter's chest tightened. This was it. Max knew. He always knew. And now, so did everyone else. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom, as thick as fog. Max's growl still echoed in everyone's ears. His body was taut, his hackles raised, his deep brown eyes locked onto Daniel Creed like a predator tracking its prey. Creed was pale. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. This is ridiculous, he spat. It's just a dog. He's been trained to react. This isn't evidence. But everyone in that room had seen it. They had felt it. The energy had shifted. Judge Harrison rubbed his temples before adjusting his glasses. Ms. Reynolds, do you have any explanation for your client's visible panic? Reynolds quickly regained her composure. Your Honor, my client is reacting because he's being unfairly accused based on a police dog's behavior. Any normal person would be shaken by a dog suddenly lunging at them. She exhaled sharply and turned to Carter. Detective, unless you have actual forensic evidence tying my client to the crime, this entire display is meaningless. Carter clenched his jaw. She's good. Max was the key to unraveling this entire case, but without hard evidence, Creed could still walk free. And something about that, about him, felt off. Max wasn't just reacting to a vague memory. This wasn't just instinct. No, Max was afraid. Something isn't right. Carter had worked with K-9 units long enough to know the difference between aggression and fear. And this wasn't just a dog identifying a suspect. This was pure, primal distress. Max was remembering something that went beyond that night in the storm. Carter studied the German Shepherd, the way his paws flexed against the courtroom floor, his breathing shallow, his ears flicking between Creed and the shadows near the courtroom exit. It was then that Carter felt it too. A presence, a cold sensation, like unseen eyes pressing into the back of his skull. His instincts screamed at him, "Something's not right." Then, suddenly, Max turned away from Creed. His head snapped toward the back of the courtroom, his ears locked onto something, or someone. Carter followed his gaze. Near the door, in the farthest row of benches, sat a man, in a gray overcoat. He was quiet, unassuming, his face partially obscured by the angle of the light. But there was something about him, the way he sat too still, the way his eyes never left Max, that sent a shiver down Carter's spine. Max's body language shifted. He was tracking now, not just reacting. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within the dog's chest. Not at Creed. At the man in the gray coat. A chilling revelation. Carter inhaled sharply, his mind racing. Who was this guy? He wasn't part of the press. He wasn't a lawyer or a witness. And yet, Max knew him, which meant one thing. This wasn't just about Creed. There was someone else involved. Carter felt his pulse quicken as he discreetly signaled to a bailiff. The man in the gray coat near the exit. Get his name. The bailiff nodded and moved toward the man. But then, the man stood. Not quickly, not in a panic. Just calmly, almost too calmly, and then, without a single glance back, he walked out of the courtroom. A cold realization settled over Carter. Whoever he was, he didn't want to be seen. And Max had just given him away. Carter grabbed his phone, heart pounding, and sent a quick message to his partner outside. Follow the guy in the gray coat. Don't lose him. Creed's reaction, back at the defense table, Creed seemed to notice the shift in focus. He was watching Carter now, confusion flickering across his face, and then something else. Fear. Carter caught it in his eyes, a flash of panic, just for a second before he masked it with anger. "What's going on?" Creed demanded. "Are you seriously wasting time on some random guy?" Carter turned to him, calm but deliberate. "You know who he is, don't you?" Creed scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about." But his voice cracked, and Carter saw it. That microsecond of hesitation. Max was still staring at the door, his body rigid, his nose twitching as if the man's scent lingered. Carter took a slow step forward. That man had nothing to do with this trial. He wasn't on the witness list. He didn't work in this courthouse. And yet, Max recognized him. Creed's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "You're grasping at straws," Carter smirked. "Am I?" Silence. Then, Max let out a sharp bark, one that made Creed flinch. The entire room felt it, and suddenly, the case against Creed wasn't just about what had happened that night. It was about something bigger, something darker, and Carter knew one thing for sure. They weren't done yet. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Creed shifted in his seat, jaw tight, eyes darting to the door where the man in the gray coat had just disappeared. Max's stance hadn't changed. His ears were still locked forward, his nose twitching, his entire body vibrating with alertness. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was waiting. For what? Carter's phone buzzed. A message from his partner. Lost him. Slipped into an alley. No security cams nearby. Damn it. Carter clenched his jaw. Whoever the guy in the gray coat was, he knew how to vanish. And if Max recognized him, that meant he was connected to whatever had happened that night. But how? And why was Creed suddenly so afraid? A courtroom in chaos. The judge slammed his gavel. "Detective Carter, I hope you have a point to make. We're not here to chase ghosts." Carter met the judge's gaze. "Your Honor, I believe we just witnessed an accomplice fleeing this very courtroom." The murmurs grew louder. The tension shifted. Creed shot up from his chair. "This is insane. You have no proof of anything. It's just a dog barking at random people." Carter tilted his head. "Random people, huh? Then why do you look like you just saw a ghost?" Creed's lips pressed into a thin line, but his fingers twitched. Max was still staring at the door, his tail stiff as a rod. He knew something, and so did Creed. Before Carter could push further, the courtroom erupted. Boom! A loud crash outside. Max whipped his head around, ears twitching at the sound. Everyone turned toward the windows. A commotion outside the courthouse. Shouts, and then a gunshot. Bang! Screams, and just like that, the trial was no longer the most important thing in that room. A dangerous escape, Carter's instincts took over. He grabbed his badge, pushing past the crowd toward the exit. Max lunged forward, his leash barely holding him back as he strained toward the door. His snarl echoed. Through the room, Carter turned to the bailiff. "Get everyone to safety, now." Judge Harrison pounded the gavel, but the order in the courtroom was already gone. Creed sat frozen in place, his expression shifting from anger to something else, something close to realization. And then he moved, fast, too fast. Carter reacted, instinctively, lunging for him, but Creed was already bolting toward the side exit. "Stop him!" Carter barked. Max ripped free from his leash, his paws slamming against the tile floor as he charged after Creed. The German Shepherd was faster. Creed barely made it past the doorway before Max's powerful frame slammed into him, knocking him off balance. He crashed against the wall with a grunt, but he wasn't going down without a fight. His elbow shot back, colliding with Max's snout. A yelp, but Max didn't retreat. He snapped his jaws, catching Creed's sleeve, holding on tight. Carter skidded around the corner, gun drawn. "Enough!" Creed froze, panting. Carter's voice was steady. "Tell me right now, who was that man?" For the first time since the trial began, Creed looked truly shaken. His lips parted, but no words came out. Because suddenly, a black SUV peeled around the courthouse corner, tires screeching, windows tinted, and Carter's gut twisted. He knew exactly what this was. A race against time. Max barked wildly, his entire body snapping toward the SUV like a coiled spring ready to pounce. Carter didn't hesitate. "Max, go!" The dog launched forward. The SUV's doors burst open. Two men in ski masks jumped out. One held a gun. The other held a shock baton. Carter's breath hitched, but Max was faster. Before the man with the gun could aim, Max lunged. Straight at him, teeth bared, the attacker barely had time to react before 50 pounds of pure muscle tackled him to the pavement. The gun clattered away. The second man raised the baton. "Back off!" Carter roared, his weapon trained on them. Man hesitated, just long enough for the courthouse security team to swarm the scene. Within seconds, the gunman was disarmed. The second attacker was forced to the ground, but Carter's focus wasn't on them anymore. It was on Max. The dog was still holding down the first attacker, growling low in his throat. Carter could see it in his eyes. Recognition, and suddenly, everything clicked. Max knew these men, he had seen them before, and Creed. He had stopped struggling the moment they arrived. Carter turned back to Creed, who was still pinned against the courthouse wall. For the first time, Creed's cocky smirk was gone. He knew. He knew it was over. Carter holstered his gun and took a slow step forward. Max didn't just recognize you, Creed. He recognized them. Creed said nothing, but Carter could see the truth all over his face. This wasn't just a random case of animal cruelty. This wasn't just about a lone attack. This was bigger. And Max had just exposed it all. The chaos outside the courthouse had finally settled. The gunmen were in custody. The black SUV had been towed away for forensic analysis. Creed sat in a holding cell refusing to speak, his once arrogant demeanor now replaced by silent tension. But Max? Max sat beside Carter on the courthouse steps, his body still tense, his ears still perked, but his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were locked onto Carter with something different. Recognition. Trust. Maybe even relief. Carter exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. He glanced at Max, who had barely left his side since the attack. "Guess you saved my ass back there, huh?" Max didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, cautiously, he leaned against Carter's leg. A silent acknowledgement. A bond forming. Carter wasn't an emotional guy. He didn't get attached, not to cases, not to people, and certainly not to animals. But Max. Something about Max was different. He wasn't just some canine. He had been trained to protect, yes, but there was something in his eyes, a depth, a sadness. Like he had seen too much, like he had lost something. Carter reached down slowly, giving Max time to pull away if he wanted. But the dog didn't flinch. His fingers brushed against Max's fur. Rough, strong, but warm. A part of him softened. "You're not just a witness, are you?" Carter muttered. Max lifted his head, his deep brown eyes locking onto Carter's. It was as if he understood every word. And then, for the first time, Max did something unexpected. He licked Carter's hand, not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of trust. An unspoken understanding. The wind was sharp, biting at Carter's skin as he stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the city beyond. He still had so many questions. Who were those men? Why did Max recognize them? And why did Creed look like he had just seen his worst nightmare when they showed up? Carter let out a slow breath. "Looks like you and I have a long road ahead, huh?" Max just stared at him, silent, watching. But this time, when Carter turned to walk toward his car, Max followed. No hesitation, no leash, just pure trust. For the first time since this case began, Carter wasn't working alone. He had a partner, and he had a feeling this German Shepherd was about to change everything. The city courthouse was empty now, its towering columns casting long shadows under the dim streetlights. Most of the officers had left after the chaos of the earlier attack. But Carter was still inside, sitting at his desk, staring at the case files scattered before him. Max lay on the floor beside him, watching, waiting. His ears twitched at every distant noise, his sharp eyes never leaving Carter. Something wasn't adding up. The gunmen who had attacked the courthouse, they weren't just some random criminals. They had moved too efficiently, their actions too coordinated, professional, and the way Creed had looked at Max. Terrified. Carter drummed his fingers against the table. "You knew them, didn't you?" he muttered, glancing down at Max. The dog didn't react, at least not at first. Then, after a moment, Max let out a low, guttural growl. Carter stiffened. Max was staring at the window. Carter's instincts kicked in. He reached for his gun just as a red laser dot appeared on the wall. "Sniper! Down!" Carter barked, lunging to the side. The glass shattered as a bullet tore through the window. Papers went flying. Carter hit the ground, shielding himself behind the desk. Max was already moving. The dog launched toward the door, snarling, his body tense. Footsteps. Someone was inside the building. The hidden truth Carter grabbed his gun and peered around the corner. The hall was dark, too dark. The emergency lights flickered overhead. Max was at the door, ears forward, body tense. He wasn't barking, wasn't moving. He was listening. A second later, he turned left. Carter followed. He trusted Max now. They moved quickly, their footsteps silent. Down the hall, past the courtroom, toward the records room. And then, a shadow moved. Carter barely had time to react before a masked man lunged at him, a knife flashing in the dim light. Knapp! Max was faster. The German Shepherd launched forward, teeth sinking into the attacker's arm. The man screamed, stumbling back as Max tore the knife from his grasp. Carter wasted no time. He grabbed the man's collar and slammed him against the wall. "Who sent you?" he growled. The man thrashed, but Max was right there, growling deep in his throat, fangs bared. The attacker went still, terrified. But before Carter could press for answers, bang! A second shot rang out, this one from down the hall. A distraction. Carter cursed. There were more of them. He pulled out his cuffs, locking the man's wrists behind his back before yanking him toward the stairs. "We're getting out of here," he muttered. Max took the lead, ears twitching, sniffing the air. He was tracking something, and Carter had a feeling they were running out of time. The clue. They almost missed as they reached the lower level. Carter kicked open the back exit, dragging the struggling attacker with him. The parking lot was empty. The sniper was gone. Max pulled at his leash, his nose working overtime. Carter turned to his prisoner. "Talk." The man shook his head. Carter shoved him against the wall. "You just tried to kill an officer inside a courthouse. You really think you're walking away from this?" Still, the man said nothing. Then, Max growled. Carter followed his gaze. The German Shepherd wasn't looking at the attacker. He was looking at the man's boot, more specifically, the symbol on the side. Carter narrowed his eyes. He crouched, inspecting the faint military insignia, a Special Forces unit. His blood ran cold. These weren't just hitmen. They were ex-military, and that meant whoever was behind this had serious power. Carter stood slowly, his grip tightening on the man's collar. "I don't need you to talk," he muttered, "because I just figured out exactly who you work for." The man's eyes widened. Carter turned to Max. "Let's go, partner. We just found our lead." Max gave a single, sharp bark. This case wasn't just about a German Shepherd anymore. It was about something bigger. And Carter wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the truth was this close. The warehouse smelled of oil and dust. Carter crouched behind a stack of crates, his gun drawn. The abandoned shipyard on the city's outskirts was silent. Too silent. Max stood beside him, his ears pricked forward, his muscles tight with tension. He knew this was a trap. Carter's heart pounded as he scanned the shadows. Somewhere inside this building was the man they were after, the one pulling the strings behind this entire operation. And Carter had a feeling they were walking straight into the lion's den. The final test-a-soft clink echoed in the distance. Carter froze. Max let out a low growl. Then, a voice. "You should have stayed out of this, Detective." Carter turned toward the sound. A figure stepped from the darkness, a tall man in a long coat, his gun held lazily at his side. His face was partially hidden by the dim lighting, but Carter recognized that voice. Creed. The man who had nearly killed him at the courthouse. The man who had looked at Max with sheer terror. "Put the gun down," Creed said. Carter scoffed. "Not happening," Creed exhaled, shaking his head. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Carter's grip on his gun tightened. "Then why don't you explain it to me?" Creed took a step forward, but then Max growled. The man stopped. His jaw clenched. "That damn dog!" Carter glanced down at Max. The German Shepherd was staring straight at Creed, his body rigid. But there was something else. A flicker of recognition. Carter's breath caught in his throat. Wait a second. He turned back to Creed. You know him, don't you? Creed's expression darkened. I said, put the gun down. Carter didn't move. What did you do to him? Creed's lips curled into a sneer. That mutt. He was one of ours, a project, until he went rogue. Carter's stomach turned. A project. Then it clicked. Max wasn't just any dog. He had been part of something bigger. Some kind of military experiment. And now, the people who had trained him wanted him dead. The choice Carter barely had time to react before a gunshot rang out. Bang! He dove behind the crates as the bullet slammed into the concrete floor beside him. Max darted forward. Max! No! But the German Shepherd was already moving, his body low, his speed explosive. Creed fired again, but he missed. Max launched himself into the air, slamming into Creed with the full force of his weight. The gun went flying. Creed hit the ground, cursing as Max's teeth snapped inches from his throat. Carter sprang to his feet, rushing toward them. Creed struggled, reaching for a knife at his belt. Carter aimed. Don't! Creed hesitated. Max growled, pressing his weight harder against the man's chest. His eyes were filled with something Carter hadn't seen before. Pure, unrelenting fury. Creed gritted his teeth. He was never supposed to get out. Carter stepped closer. What are you talking about? Creed spat blood onto the floor. He's a damn weapon, Detective. A military-bred K-9 designed to track, attack, and kill. We trained him to be ruthless. He looked at Max, his face twisted in disgust. And yet, he turned into this. Carter's jaw clenched. A protector. Creed scoffed. He's dangerous. No, Carter said firmly. He's loyal. Max didn't take his eyes off Creed. His body trembled with adrenaline, his breath heavy. He was waiting for Carter's command, for permission. And for the first time, Carter realized something. Max could kill Creed right now. He could end this. But he wasn't. Because he wasn't a weapon. He was more than that. Carter knelt beside Max, placing a hand on the dog's back. It's over, buddy, he said softly. We don't need to be like them. Max hesitated, then let out a slow exhale. His stance relaxed, and in that moment, Carter knew. Max had chosen his path. He wasn't a killer. He was a hero. Carter cuffed Creed and called it in. The authorities arrived within minutes, swarming the warehouse, securing the area. Carter stood off to the side, watching as Creed was shoved into the back of a police van. It was over, but Max was staring at the van, his ears tilted back slightly, as if deep in thought. Carter knelt beside him. You okay? Max turned his head toward him, his deep brown eyes locking onto Carter's. And for the first time since they met, Max leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Carter's chest. Carter felt his throat tighten. Yeah, he whispered, scratching behind Max's ears. Me too, buddy. They had both been through hell, but somehow they had saved each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars illuminated the cold night air as officers secured the crime scene. The shipyard, once filled with shadows and danger, was now eerily still. Carter stood beside Max, watching as the police van carrying Creed disappeared down the road. It was over, but a strange emptiness settled in his chest. The battle had been won, but something felt unfinished. Max sat beside him, his ears perked slightly, eyes fixed on the departing vehicle. He wasn't growling anymore, just staring, thinking. Carter exhaled. You okay, buddy? Max turned to him, his deep brown eyes searching Carter's face. And for the first time, Carter truly saw it. A quiet sadness. Max had been through so much. He had lost his past. He had been hunted, betrayed, used. And now, he had no home. Carter swallowed hard, the weight of realization hitting him. Max had been fighting for something. For someone. But the fight was over, and the question hung between them like a heavy fog. What happens now? A familiar voice pulled Carter from his thoughts. He's one hell of a dog. Carter turned to see Captain Reynolds approaching, his hands in his coat pockets. His expression was unreadable, but there was something softer in his eyes than usual. He saved my life, Carter said. More than once, Reynolds nodded. And now he needs a home. Carter tensed. He knew what Reynolds was about to say. Max was government property. No matter how much he had proven himself, the system would want him back. We can't just let a K-9 with his level of training roam free, Reynolds said carefully. The higher-ups are already talking. They want to put him back in a controlled environment. Carter clenched his fists. You mean lock him up? Reynolds didn't deny it. Carter looked down at Max. The German shepherd was still sitting patiently, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes, like he knew this moment was coming, and he was waiting for Carter to decide. Carter's chest tightened. He had spent years keeping people at a distance, losing partners, losing friends. He had sworn never to get too attached, but Max wasn't just a dog, he was family, and Carter wasn't about to let him go. Carter turned back to Reynolds. No, Reynolds raised an eyebrow. No? I'm not handing him over, Carter said, his voice firm. You want him off the streets? Fine, I'll take him. Reynolds studied him for a long moment. Then, to Carter's surprise, the captain smiled. I figured you'd say that. Carter blinked. Wait. What? Reynolds pulled out a folder and handed it over. I already pulled some strings. The adoption papers are inside. All you have to do is sign. Carter stared at the folder in disbelief. He had been ready for a fight. But Reynolds had already made sure Max could stay. Carter exhaled a shaky breath. Why? Reynolds smirked. Because I've been a cop long enough to know a real partner when I see one. He glanced at Max. And that dog belongs with you. Carter looked down at Max, his throat tightening. Looks like you're stuck with me, buddy. Max let out a soft huff, then did something that made Carter laugh. He nudged the folder with his nose, like he was telling Carter to sign. Carter chuckled, shaking his head. All right, I'm doing it. With a quick stroke of the pen, it was official. Max wasn't a stray, he wasn't a weapon, he was home. The next morning, Carter woke up to something new. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel empty. He walked into the living room, where Max was curled up on the couch, his tail wagging lazily as he lifted his head. Carter smirked. That's not your bed, you know. Max yawned, stretched, and rested his head back down. Carter sighed. Yeah, all right, you win. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window. The world outside was still the same. Still unpredictable. Still dangerous. But inside these walls, he wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare him. He glanced over his shoulder at Max. You hungry? Max's ears perked. Carter chuckled. Yeah. Let's get some breakfast. And as they walked into the kitchen together, Carter realized something. Max hadn't just found a home. He had given Carter one, too. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden rays across the living room. Carter sat on the couch, sipping his coffee, while Max lay stretched out beside him, his tail thumping lazily against the cushion. For the first time in years, Carter felt at peace. No sirens, no gunshots, no chaos, just quiet. And yet, deep down, he knew something had changed forever. A reflection on the journey, Carter reached out and ran a hand through Max's thick fur. The German shepherd let out a contented sigh, pressing into his touch. I don't know what I would have done without you, buddy, Carter murmured. Max lifted his head, his deep brown eyes locking onto Carter's, a silent understanding passing between them. Carter thought back to everything they had been through, the moment he had first seen Max, limping, desperate but determined to survive. The tension, the fear, the chase through the frozen woods, the fight for truth, the battle for justice, and now it all led to this moment. Carter had spent years pushing people away, afraid of losing them, afraid of getting too close. But Max had torn down those walls, not with words, not with promises, but with unwavering loyalty, unshakable trust, and a bond that could never be broken. What happens next? Carter glanced at Max's police-issued collar. It still held the weight of his past. The battles he had fought, the missions he had endured, but he wasn't just a K-9 unit anymore. He was family. Carter unbuckled the collar and set it aside, replacing it with a new one that was simple but carried a name tag. Max. No numbers, no badge, just Max, the German. Shepard huffed softly and licked Carter's hand, as if he understood what the gesture meant. Carter smirked. Yeah, don't get all sentimental on me now. Max let out a small bark, his tail wagging faster. Carter laughed. For the first time in a long time, it felt like he wasn't just existing. He was living. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the crisp scent of pine. Carter stood by the door, watching as Max trotted into the yard, his ears perked, his stance alert. But for once, he wasn't searching for threats. He was simply enjoying life. Carter exhaled, a slow, deep breath. Maybe they had both been searching for something. Maybe they had both been lost. But they had found each other, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Carter called out, "Come on, Max, let's go home." Max looked back, his tail wagging, then ran to his side without hesitation. Because home wasn't just a place. It was the people and the animals you chose to keep in your life. Carter opened the door, stepping inside with Max by his side. But before, the screen fades to black. A message appears. Have you ever witnessed an unbreakable bond between a human and an animal? Share your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Tag a friend who loves dogs, because some stories deserve to be shared. And with that, the story ends, not with words, but with a feeling of love, of loyalty, and of the simple, undeniable truth. Sometimes the ones who save us aren't human at all.